Humanity has always been fascinated by the mysteries of the mind. For centuries, we've tried to unravel how the brain shapes our thoughts, actions, and sense of self, but some discoveries don't just answer questions, they pose unsettling new ones. Enter the split brain dilemma, a phenomenon that forces us to rethink what it means to be a single, unified person. At the heart of this dilemma lies a medical procedure called a corpus callosotomy. In rare and extreme cases of epilepsy, doctors sometimes sever the corpus callosum, the thick bundle of nerves connecting the brain's two hemispheres. This procedure can dramatically reduce seizures, but it comes with an unexpected side effect. It creates a brain that is effectively divided in two. Under normal circumstances, the left and right hemispheres of the brain work together seamlessly, sharing information through the corpus callosum. But when this connection is severed, the hemispheres are cut off from one another. And here's where things get strange. Each hemisphere specializes in different tasks. The left side typically handles language and analytical thinking, while the right side focuses on spatial awareness and creativity. After a split brain procedure, these specialized regions continue functioning, but now they act independently. This independence was revealed through groundbreaking experiments in the 20th century. Researchers devised clever tests to isolate each hemisphere's input and output. For instance, they would show an object, like an apple, to the patient's left visual field, which is processed by the right hemisphere. The patient would claim not to see anything because the right hemisphere lacks language ability. But if asked to pick up the object, their left hand, controlled by the right hemisphere, would correctly select the apple. It's as if two separate minds are coexisting within one skull. The left hemisphere, with its language capabilities, often dominates verbal communication and insists that it's in charge. Meanwhile, the right hemisphere quietly processes the world and influences behavior in ways the left side might not even notice. In some experiments, the two hemispheres even seem to have conflicting desires. A patient's right hand might reach for a book, while their left hand pushes it away. This raises profound questions. If the brain can be split into two independent systems, where does consciousness reside? Are we still a single individual, or does each hemisphere have its own sense of self? And if there are two minds, which one is you? The split brain dilemma challenges our intuition about identity. We like to think of ourselves as unified beings, with one continuous stream of consciousness. But the reality might be more fragmented than we're comfortable admitting. Even in people with intact brains, different neural networks handle different tasks, often without our awareness. The split brain phenomenon could be an extreme example of something that's true for all of us. That the self is not a single cohesive entity, but a collection of systems working together, or sometimes in conflict. This understanding has far-reaching implications. It suggests that our sense of unity is a product of how the brain integrates its functions. When that integration breaks down, so does our perception of being one person. It's a humbling reminder that our identities are more fragile and complex than we realize. The split brain dilemma doesn't just challenge neuroscience, it confronts philosophy. If two minds can exist in one body, what does that mean for concepts like free will and personal responsibility? And if our sense of self is just an emergent property of brain activity, what happens when that activity is disrupted? In the end, the split brain dilemma reminds us that the mind is one of the universe's greatest mysteries. We've come a long way in understanding how the brain works, but discoveries like this show us how much more there is to learn. Perhaps the most unsettling revelation is that the unity we feel may not be as solid as it seems. That within each of us, there may always be many voices, quietly collaborating to create the illusion of one. Imagine you're walking down a crowded street. Suddenly you stop dead in your tracks. Across the way, you see someone who looks exactly like you, not just similar, identical, the same eyes, hair, posture, even the way they hold their phone. It's as if a perfect copy of you exists in the world. Is this a case of mistaken identity? Or could it be evidence of something far stranger? This is the idea of the doppelganger universe, a mind-bending thought experiment rooted in the concept of infinity. It takes us on a journey into the vastness of the cosmos, challenging everything we think we know about reality, identity, and existence. To start, let's talk about how staggeringly huge the universe is. Our observable universe spans 93 billion light-years, with trillions of galaxies, each holding billions of stars and even more planets. It's impossible to truly comprehend how vast this is. But here's the catch. The observable universe might be only a tiny bubble in an even larger, possibly infinite cosmos. If the universe is infinite, strange things become not just possible, but inevitable. Imagine rolling a pair of dice. In a finite universe, you might roll every combination of numbers eventually. But in an infinite universe, you'll roll the same combinations over and over again. Now, scale that up to reality. If there's infinite space filled with stars, planets, and people, it's only a matter of time before the particles in the universe arrange themselves into something identical to you. This is where the doppelganger universe comes in. Somewhere out there, in the endless vastness of infinity, there could be another version of you. Maybe they're sitting in a room just like this one, listening to these same words. Or maybe their life is just slightly different. Maybe they chose a different career, live in a different city, or wear their hair a little differently. And for every variation, there could be countless more. This isn't just science fiction, it's a possibility born from real physics. The idea is rooted in the theory of eternal inflation, which suggests that the universe we see is part of a much larger multiverse. In this framework, new universes are constantly being born, like bubbles in a boiling pot of water. Each bubble might have different laws of physics, but some could be almost identical to ours. And in those, there could be other Earths, other versions of you living out alternate lives. But the idea of doppelgangers raises some unsettling questions. If there's another you out there, what does that mean for your uniqueness? Does your existence lose meaning if it's just one of countless copies? And if your double made different choices, would their life be better or worse than yours? It also makes us question the nature of identity. Are you defined by the unique path you've taken through life, or by something deeper, something that no copy could ever replicate? And if you met your doppelganger, would they feel like a stranger or like looking into a mirror? But let's zoom out even further. The doppelganger universe isn't just about individuals, it's about everything. In an infinite cosmos, every possible arrangement of matter could exist somewhere. There could be worlds where history played out differently, where life evolved in ways we can't imagine, where the very laws of physics are unrecognizable. Infinity isn't just big, it's weird. Of course, this is all highly speculative. We don't know for sure if the universe is infinite or if doppelgangers are even possible. Our current understanding of the cosmos has limits, and the answers to these questions might remain forever out of reach. But even as a thought experiment, the doppelganger universe challenges us to think differently about existence. It forces us to confront the vastness of reality and the tiny, fleeting nature of our place within it. Yet it also reminds us that even if there are infinite versions of you out there, none of them are living this exact moment. Right here, right now, you're the only you that matters. So, what if there's another you in the infinite expanse of the cosmos? What if they're wondering the exact same thing right now? Maybe that's the beauty of the doppelganger universe. Not that it diminishes who we are, but that it shows just how extraordinary it is to be this version of you, living this life, in this corner of the universe. The Golden Rule subversion. The Golden Rule is one of humanity's oldest and most cherished moral principles. Found in many cultures and religions, it simply states, treat others as you would want to be treated. At first glance, it seems universal, logical, and straightforward, a guide to building a fair and empathetic society. But what if it isn't as perfect as it seems? The golden rule assumes that everyone shares the same desires and values, that what you would want in a given situation is the same as what someone else might want. But humans are complicated. We have different needs, experiences, and perspectives. And this is where things get messy. Imagine you're the kind of person who loves surprises. You might think it's a great idea to surprise a friend with an unplanned visit. After all, you'd love it if someone did that for you. But what if your friend values privacy and hates surprises? By following the golden rule, you might unintentionally create an awkward or even upsetting situation. Your good intentions could backfire. This is where the golden rule meets its first challenge. The assumption that your preferences are universal. What feels like kindness to one person might feel intrusive to another. Instead of fostering empathy, it risks projecting your own values onto others without understanding their unique perspective. But let's take it further. What happens when someone uses the golden rule in reverse? A twisted interpretation could lead to dangerous logic. A person might think, if I'm okay with being treated harshly, then I'm justified in treating others harshly too. This subversion flips the rule on its head, turning it into an excuse for cruelty instead of compassion. Or consider an even darker scenario. What if someone enjoys causing harm? They might claim, since I wouldn't mind being harmed in this way, it's fine for me to harm others. By following the golden rule, they could justify actions that most people would find abhorrent. This reveals a troubling flaw. The rule relies entirely on the morality of the individual applying it. If their values are skewed, so are their actions. This is why some philosophers argue for a different approach, the platinum rule. Instead of treating others as you would want to be treated, it suggests treating others as they would want to be treated. This subtle shift puts the focus on understanding and respecting the needs and desires of others, rather than assuming they align with your own. But even the platinum rule has its limits. It requires a level of empathy, communication, and understanding that isn't always possible. What if you don't know what someone wants? What if their desires conflict with your own well-being or moral principles? These dilemmas show that no single rule can fully capture the complexity of human relationships. So, where does that leave us? The golden rule is still a powerful starting point. It reminds us to pause, reflect, and consider the impact of our actions on others. But it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. It needs to be paired with curiosity, empathy, and a willingness to question our assumptions. By recognizing its limitations and learning to navigate its nuances, we can transform the golden rule into something even more meaningful. Not just a simple guideline, but a dynamic tool for understanding and connecting with the diverse, complex world around us. Because at the end of the day, the golden rule, and any rule, is only as good as the thought and care we put into following it. It's not about perfection. It's about striving to be better, one action at a time.
Morean absurdity.
Morean absurdity is one of those philosophical ideas that sounds simple at first, but the deeper you dig, the more it challenges your understanding of reality and logic. At its heart, it's about what happens when our everyday beliefs clash with high-level philosophical reasoning. And trust us, it's a trip worth taking. Let's start with the basics. Imagine you're sitting in a room. You look down and see your hands. You move your fingers, wiggle them around. It feels obvious. You know you have hands. You don't need to debate it or prove it. It's just something you know. This kind of knowledge is what philosophers call common sense. Now enter G.E. Moore, a British philosopher who became famous for defending common sense against skeptical arguments. Moore said something like this: "Here is one hand and here is another, therefore I know that two hands exist." It's a bold move, almost playful in its simplicity. But it's also surprisingly profound because it pushes back against an entire tradition of skeptical philosophy. Skeptics argue that you can't really trust your senses or your beliefs about the world. They'll say things like, "How do you know you're not in a simulation, or dreaming, or that reality itself isn't an elaborate illusion?" Philosophers like Descartes famously doubted everything except the fact that they were thinking. But Moore flips this script. Instead of doubting everything, he doubles down on the obvious. His response to skepticism is basically, I have hands, that's good enough for me. At first, this seems like a mic drop moment. Moore's argument is so clear and intuitive that it feels like he's won the debate. But here's where the absurdity comes in. While his defense of common sense feels right, it also raises uncomfortable questions. Can we really rely on our everyday beliefs to dismiss deep philosophical skepticism? Or are we just ignoring bigger problems because they're too unsettling to think about? Here's an example to make things weirder. Imagine a skeptic says, "You don't know for sure that the external world exists." Moore would respond, "I know the world exists because I know I have hands." But the skeptic might counter, "How do you know your hands exist?" And Moore's reply is essentially, "Because I can see and feel them." This back and forth creates a strange loop where common sense feels undeniable, but fails to address the skeptic's deeper challenge. The absurdity here lies in the clash between two perspectives. On one hand, common sense says, "Of course I have hands, let's move on." On the other hand, philosophy demands a higher level of justification. It's like trying to explain why water is wet. You know it is. But putting it into words feels impossible without sounding ridiculous. Moorean absurdity forces us to confront the limits of what we can know and how we justify our beliefs. It's not just about hands or skepticism. It's about the tension between the obvious and the uncertain, the practical and the theoretical. So what do we do with this? One option is to embrace the absurdity. Maybe it's okay to live with both perspectives, to trust our hands while acknowledging that on some level, we can't prove they're real. Another option is to dive deeper into philosophy and keep questioning, even if it feels like there are no satisfying answers. Moorean absurdity reminds us that knowledge isn't always neat and tidy. It's messy, filled with contradictions and blind spots. And yet, this messiness is what makes philosophy so exciting. It invites us to think harder, to question more, and to explore the boundaries of what we know and what we don't. In the end, Moore's argument isn't about solving skepticism. It's about finding a balance between doubt and certainty. It's a reminder that even in the face of absurdity, we can still hold on to the things that ground us, like our hands, or at least the belief that they're there. Quantum immortality. You will never die, because reality by design may ensure the continuity of your consciousness, subtly steering it through the infinite pathways of the multiverse. This is quantum immortality, the thought experiment so strange that it challenges everything we know about life, death, and existence. Here's how it works. In quantum mechanics, particles exist in a state of superposition, every possible outcome happening simultaneously until observed. Schrödinger's cat embodies this idea. Inside a sealed box, a cat is both alive and dead until the box is opened and its state is determined. But what happens if the cat is you? According to the many worlds interpretation, the universe doesn't choose a single outcome when a quantum event occurs. Instead, it splits into multiple branches, one for every possible result. In one branch, you might survive a car crash. In another, you don't. From the perspective of the multiverse, both outcomes exist. But here's the twist. Your consciousness can only continue in the branches where you're alive. This leads to a startling conclusion. In every moment where survival is uncertain, you would always experience the outcome where you live. To an outside observer, you might perish in one universe, but from your perspective, you'd wake up again and again in the realities where you endure. The result is a strange kind of immortality, not eternal youth or invincibility, but a seamless, unbroken thread of consciousness through the multiverse. But this so-called immortality doesn't save you from aging, disease, or the slow decay of the body. It only applies when there's a quantum chance of survival. Eventually, those chances dwindle, and the thread of universes keeping you alive runs out. Even immortality has its limits. Does this mean quantum immortality is real? We don't know. It depends on whether the many worlds interpretation truly reflects reality, a debate that physicists are far from resolving. If it's true, then every quantum event creates an infinite branching of universes, and your consciousness might endlessly ride the wave of survival. If it's not, the idea remains a fascinating, if unsettling, thought experiment about the nature of life, death, and consciousness. Hallucinatory reality. Picture a world where reality is not something you perceive, but something your brain actively creates. A world where the boundary between what is real and what is imagined is blurry, and what you see, hear, and feel could all be illusions constructed by your mind. This is the unsettling idea of hallucinatory reality, the notion that the world we experience might be less out there and more in here. To understand hallucinatory reality, let's start with perception. Our brains are wired to make sense of the chaotic information flooding in from our senses. Your eyes, for instance, don't just capture the world like a camera. Instead, they send electrical signals to the brain, which interprets these signals and constructs an image. This process happens so seamlessly that it feels like you're simply observing reality. But here's the twist. Your brain doesn't show you reality as it is. It filters, edits, and even fabricates parts of the experience. Why? Because raw reality is messy, overwhelming, and often irrelevant. Your brain's job isn't to present the truth. It's to create a functional model of the world that helps you survive. Consider this. When you look at a color, what you're seeing isn't the color itself, but how your brain interprets wavelengths of light. The same object under different lighting can look completely different, yet your brain adjusts the perception automatically. Or think about your blind spots. Each eye has areas with no visual input, yet you don't notice blank patches because your brain fills them in. This editing process is usually helpful. It allows you to focus on the important stuff, like spotting a tiger in the grass or avoiding an oncoming car. But it also means your experience of reality is, by definition, a hallucination. A controlled, shared hallucination that's shaped by your senses, your brain's wiring, and your past experiences. Things get even stranger when we look at how easily this hallucination can break. Take optical illusions. A simple pattern of lines can make you see motion where there is none. Or think about auditory hallucinations, where your brain invents sounds that aren't there, often based on expectations. Even your memory, something you trust as a record of the past, is deeply unreliable, constantly rewritten and reshaped. These small cracks in our perception remind us that our reality isn't solid. And in extreme cases, these cracks widen. Psychedelic drugs like LSD or psilocybin reveal how deeply your brain shapes reality. Under their influence, ordinary objects can morph, colors explode into new dimensions, and your sense of time might melt. While it feels like an external reality is shifting, what's actually happening is that your brain is rewriting the rules of perception. But hallucinatory reality isn't just a quirk of our biology, it's a survival mechanism. Imagine an animal that perceives the world exactly as it is, with no shortcuts or interpretations. It would be slow, overwhelmed, and unable to act quickly. Evolution favors creatures that distort reality in ways that increase their chances of survival. For humans, this means creating a mental model of the world that simplifies complexity, highlights danger, and prioritizes opportunities. This brings us to a profound question. If reality is a hallucination, does an objective reality even exist? Philosophers and scientists have debated this for centuries. Some argue there is an external reality that we perceive imperfectly. Others, like proponents of idealism, suggest that reality might only exist in the mind. And then there's the unsettling possibility. What if everything we know is just a simulation, a grand illusion that feels real but is not? Hallucinatory reality forces us to confront the limits of what we can know. It humbles us, showing that our understanding of the world is not just shaped by our minds, but constrained by them. But it also opens a door to wonder. If our brains can craft something as rich and vivid as reality, what else are they capable of? Could we harness this creative power to imagine entirely new experiences, new ways of thinking, even new worlds? In the end, the idea of hallucinatory reality reminds us of something profound. The world you experience is not the world itself. It's a masterpiece painted by your brain, shaped by billions of years of evolution. And like all great art, it's both beautiful and mysterious. What you see might not be real, but it is yours. And maybe, just maybe, that's what makes it so extraordinary. Mary's room. Mary is a brilliant scientist. She lives in a black and white room, studies a black and white world through a black and white screen, and has never seen colour in her entire life. But Mary knows everything about colour. She's learned all there is to know about the physics of light, the biology of eyes, and the brain's mechanisms for processing colour. She can explain exactly how different wavelengths of light correspond to colours like red or blue. She knows it all. But here's the question. What happens if Mary leaves her room? What happens when she sees colour, real, vivid colour, for the first time? Will she learn something new, or does she already know everything there is to know? This is Mary's room, a famous thought experiment introduced by philosopher Frank Jackson in 1982. At its heart, it's a deceptively simple question. Can you truly understand something through facts alone, or is there more to knowledge than information? It's a question that takes us to the edge of what we know about experience, consciousness, and the limits of science. Let's dive into the experiment. Imagine Mary steps out of her black and white room and sees a ripe red apple. In that moment, something extraordinary happens. Mary experiences the colour red, not the abstract idea of red, not the physics or biology of red, but the raw, vivid sensation of redness itself. This is called a qualia, a subjective, first-person experience. The redness of red, the blueness of blue, the feeling of pain, the taste of chocolate, the sound of a symphony. Qualia are the raw ingredients of consciousness, the private, indescribable experiences that make up what it feels like to be you. And here's the twist. No amount of scientific knowledge about colour could have prepared Mary for what it's actually like to see red. The experience of seeing red is something fundamentally different from the information about red. This leads us to the big question. If Mary learns something new by experiencing colour, does that mean there's something about consciousness that science can't explain? Is there a gap between physical facts and subjective experience? Or, to put it another way, can science ever fully explain what it feels like to be alive? Philosophers have been debating this for decades, and there are two main camps. On one side, there are the physicalists, who argue that everything, including consciousness, can ultimately be explained by physical processes. According to them, Mary doesn't actually learn anything new when she sees red. She simply gains a new way of accessing the same information she already had, like learning a fact through experience rather than description. In this view, qualia are just another aspect of the physical brain at work. On the other side, there are the dualists, who argue that Mary's new experience reveals something science can't capture. They believe qualia exist outside the realm of physical facts, and that consciousness is more than just neurons firing in your brain. To them, Mary's room highlights the limits of science and the mysteries of subjective experience. But it gets even weirder. Some philosophers suggest that the entire thought experiment is flawed. They argue that if Mary truly knew everything about colour, including what it's like to experience red, she wouldn't be surprised when she saw it. The problem, they say, isn't with consciousness, but with the thought experiment's assumptions. The implications of Mary's room stretch far beyond philosophy. It challenges us to think about how we understand the world and ourselves. Can we ever truly know what someone else is experiencing? If consciousness isn't just a physical process, what does that mean for artificial intelligence or brain simulations? And if qualia are unique to each individual, can we ever create a universal understanding of human experience? At its core, Mary's Room asks us to confront the limits of knowledge. It reminds us that some aspects of existence, what it feels like to fall in love, to taste your favorite food, or to see a sunset, can't be captured in equations or diagrams. They must be felt to be understood. So, what do you think? Did Mary learn something new when she stepped out of her room? Or was her vast knowledge already enough? Maybe the answer isn't as important as the question itself, a reminder of how strange and wonderful it is to be a conscious being in this colourful, mysterious world. Plank of Carneades. Picture yourself adrift in the open sea, clinging to life. In the distance, a single plank floats. A slender, precious chance to survive. But there's a catch. Someone else is already holding onto it. The plank isn't big enough for both of you. If you take it, they drown. If they keep it, you drown. What do? This is the plank of Carneades, an ancient thought experiment that plunges us into the murky waters of morality, self-preservation, and justice. It asks a hauntingly simple question. In a life or death situation, is survival always justified, no matter the cost? The dilemma was posed by Carneades, a Greek philosopher from the 3rd century BCE, to challenge the idea of absolute morality. If you take the plank and cause someone else's death, are you a murderer, or are you simply doing what anyone would do to survive? And more importantly, should the law hold you accountable for your actions? Let's break it down. On the one hand, self-preservation is a fundamental instinct. It's wired into our very being. In moments of extreme peril, our rational mind often takes a back seat to raw survival instinct. Grabbing the plank isn't a calculated moral failure. It's the desperate act of a human trying to stay alive. On the other hand, by taking the plank, you've made a choice. Your life, you've decided, is worth more than theirs. This raises a thorny ethical question. Does anyone's life have more inherent value than another's? And who gets to decide? If survival justifies any action, does that make morality meaningless in moments of crisis? But the plank is just the beginning. The thought experiment ripples outward, forcing us to confront uncomfortable questions about justice and the law. Imagine you survive, and the courts put you on trial for causing the other person's death. Should you be punished? Some argue yes, because morality and justice should apply even in the direst circumstances. Others say no, because extreme situations demand different rules. After all, can you truly hold someone accountable for actions taken in the throes of mortal fear? Now, let's widen the lens. The plank of Carneades isn't just about two people in a desperate situation. It's a metaphor for countless ethical dilemmas in our world. Imagine a company dumping toxic waste to save costs, knowing it will harm others, or a nation invading another to secure resources for its people. In each case, someone grabs the plank and someone else is left to drown. The stakes may differ, but the moral tension is the same. So what do we take from this? The plank of Carneades doesn't offer easy answers. Instead, it forces us to confront the complexities of morality and justice. It reminds us that ethical decisions are rarely black and white, that survival instinct is powerful, but so is our capacity for compassion and fairness. Perhaps the most important lesson is that morality isn't just about individual actions, it's about the systems and structures we create. If we build a society where people are forced into situations like the plank, maybe the real question isn't, what would you do? But how can we make sure no one has to choose? The plank of Carneades is more than a thought experiment. It's a mirror, reflecting the choices we make every day. Choices that reveal who we are and who we aspire to be. It challenges us to navigate the rough seas of morality with empathy, understanding, and a commitment to justice, even when the waves crash hardest. Imagine this. You're in a lab conducting a classic quantum experiment, say, observing a photon pass through a beam splitter. The photon has a 50-50 chance of being deflected or passing straight through. In quantum mechanics, before you measure it, the photon exists in a superposition, a strange state where it's simultaneously in both paths. But as soon as you measure it, the superposition collapses, and the photon takes one definite path. That's weird enough. But what happens when someone else is observing you? This is the setup for Wigner's friend, a thought experiment proposed by physicist Eugene Wigner in 1961. It pushes the limits of what we think we know about reality, measurement, and consciousness, questioning whether the universe has a single objective reality or if reality itself is subjective. Let's break it down. You're in the lab, observing the photon. For you, the superposition collapses the moment you measure it. You write down the result in your notebook, maybe left path or right path. From your perspective, the photon is no longer in a superposition. But here's the twist. Wigner, your friend, is standing outside the lab, completely unaware of your result. To Wigner, you and the photon are still part of the quantum system. Until he opens the door and asks what you saw, you're in a superposition of having seen left and right. To him, your measurement hasn't happened yet. This creates a paradox. From your point of view, the photon's superposition collapsed when you measured it. But from Wigner's perspective, the superposition hasn't collapsed yet. Both perspectives are correct, but they can't both be true at the same time. Or can they? Wigner's friend exposes a crack in our understanding of quantum mechanics. The theory tells us how to calculate probabilities and make predictions, but it doesn't explain what's really happening when we measure something. Is there one objective reality that everyone shares? Or does reality depend on the observer? This question gets even stranger when we consider consciousness. Wigner believed that consciousness might play a special role in collapsing the wave function, turning quantum possibilities into a single reality. In this view, your conscious observation of the photon is what makes it real. But if that's true, does Wigner's observation of you make you real? Is reality something that requires a chain of conscious observers? Or is it there all along, independent of anyone's mind? Modern experiments have added fuel to the fire. In 2019, researchers conducted a version of Wigner's friend using quantum entanglement, and the results were unsettling. They suggested that two observers could experience different, equally valid realities. This doesn't mean science is wrong. It works incredibly well, but it suggests that reality might not be as simple or singular as we think. There are a few ways to interpret Wigner's friend, none of them comfortable. One possibility is that the universe is fundamentally subjective, with different observers experiencing different realities. Another is the many worlds interpretation, where every possible outcome happens in a separate, branching universe. When you measure the photon, the universe splits. In one branch, you see left, and in another, you see right. Wigner and his friend inhabit different branches of the multiverse. A third option is that the paradox exposes the limits of quantum mechanics. Maybe the theory is incomplete, and a deeper understanding of physics will resolve the apparent contradictions. Or maybe, as some physicists argue, we're asking the wrong questions entirely, trying to impose classical ideas of reality onto a quantum world that doesn't play by our rules. Whatever the answer, Wigner's friend challenges us to rethink what we mean by reality. Is it something we discover through observation, or something we create? Are we participants in a universe that responds to our measurements, or are we just spectators in a vast, indifferent quantum theatre? In the end, Wigner's friend might not give us answers, but it forces us to confront the strangeness of the universe we live in, and the possibility that reality is far more mysterious than we ever imagined. Twin Earth, the sky is blue, the grass is green, water is wet. Simple, right? But what if we told you there's another Earth exactly like ours, down to the last blade of grass and drop of water, but with one crucial twist that challenges everything we know about meaning, knowledge, and reality? Welcome to the mind-bending world of the Twin Earth thought experiment. Twin Earth is a philosophical experiment first proposed by Hilary Putnam in 1975. Imagine this: somewhere far, far away in a parallel universe or a distant galaxy, there exists a planet identical to Earth. This twin Earth has everything our Earth does: oceans, mountains, cities, and even people just like us. But there's one key difference. On twin Earth, what looks like water isn't H2O. Instead, it's a different chemical compound. Let's call it XYZ. Here's the strange part. XYZ on twin Earth behaves exactly like water. It flows, freezes, evaporates, and quenches thirst. The people on twin Earth call it water because to them it's water. They have the same experiences with XYZ as we do with H2O. But chemically, it's entirely different. So, when someone on twin Earth says water, what are they referring to? And when we say water, are we talking about the same thing? This might sound like a trivial word game, but it opens up profound questions about meaning and language. On Earth, the word water refers to H2O, two hydrogen atoms bonded to one oxygen atom. But on twin Earth, water refers to XYZ. They're two different substances, even though they seem identical in every way that matters to the senses. This leads to an important philosophical insight. The meaning of a word isn't just about what we think it means. It also depends on the world around us. Let's break that down. On Earth, you don't need to know the molecular structure of water to talk about it. When you point to a glass and say, "That's water," you're relying on the fact that you live in a world where the clear, drinkable liquid in your glass is H2O. But on twin Earth, someone pointing to their glass and saying water is relying on their world, where that liquid is XYZ. The context, the physical makeup of the world, shapes the meaning of the word. This challenges the idea that words get their meaning only from what's in our heads. Putnam's experiment suggests that meaning isn't entirely in the mind. Instead, it's partly out there in the world. This is called semantic externalism. The idea that the meaning of a word depends not just on our thoughts, but also on the environment we're in. But twin Earth raises even weirder questions. Imagine you're magically teleported to twin Earth. You're handed a glass of XYZ, which you drink without realizing it's not H2O. For all practical purposes, it seems like water. Is it? Could you tell the difference? Would you even care? From your perspective, nothing has changed. And yet, chemically speaking, you're drinking something entirely alien. This highlights the gap between perception and reality. Just because something seems familiar doesn't mean it is. Twin Earth forces us to confront how much of our understanding is based on assumptions. Assumptions that the world we see is exactly as it appears. The implications go even deeper. Twin Earth doesn't just challenge our understanding of meaning. It also touches on knowledge, identity, and reality itself. If words depend on the environment, what does that mean for how we communicate? If you can't tell the difference between H2O and XYZ, how do you really know what you're drinking? And if two worlds can be identical on the surface, but fundamentally different at their core, what does that say about the nature of reality? Twin Earth also intersects with modern debates, like how we define substances, objects, or even concepts in science and philosophy. For example, if scientists discovered a new element that looks and behaves like gold but isn't gold, would we still call it gold? Or consider artificial intelligence. If an AI behaves exactly like a human but isn't made of neurons and flesh, is it still a person? Twin Earth helps us grapple with these kinds of questions by showing how the boundaries of meaning and understanding are shaped by context. At its heart, Twin Earth is a thought experiment that reminds us how strange and slippery reality can be. It's easy to assume that our words and concepts are universal, that water is water no matter where you go. But Putnam's experiment shows us that even the simplest ideas are shaped by the world we live in. So, next time you take a sip of water, Remember, on another Earth, far away, someone just like you might be doing the exact same thing, but what they're drinking isn't H2O, and yet, to them, it's still water. How's that for a thought to quench your philosophical thirst? There is nothing that prevents time from moving in a backward direction. Imagine a world where a broken clock winds itself back together, or a demolished building rises piece by piece to its original form. It sounds like fiction, but deep within the laws of physics, this idea isn't as absurd as it seems. Let's start with how we usually think about time. In our everyday lives, time moves in one direction, forward. We call this the arrow of time. It's why we age, why memories form, and why cause always seems to precede effect. But here's the strange part. The fundamental laws of physics don't actually require time to flow this way. The equations that govern the universe work just as well if time runs forward or backward. Take Newton's laws of motion. If you watch a video of planets orbiting the sun and play it in reverse, the motion still follows the same rules. Even quantum mechanics, the spooky world of particles, doesn't inherently prefer one direction of time over another. So why, in our everyday experience, does time seem so stubbornly one way? The answer lies in entropy. In simple terms, entropy measures disorder. Think of it like this. A tidy room has low entropy, while a messy room has high entropy. The second law of thermodynamics tells us that, over time, entropy tends to increase. Eggs break, not unbreak. Ice melts into water, not the other way around. This increase in entropy creates the illusion of time flowing forward. But here's where temporal reversal gets really fascinating. What if entropy didn't always increase? What if there were regions of the universe or moments in time where entropy decreased? In such a scenario, time could effectively flow backward, at least from the perspective of those within it. Imagine a world where people remember the future but not the past, where cause and effect swap places. This isn't just idle speculation. Physicists have explored scenarios where temporal reversal might occur. One idea comes from black holes. At the center of a black hole, the laws of physics break down. Some theories suggest that the extreme conditions could create pockets of reverse time. Another idea involves the early universe. Right after the Big Bang, when the cosmos was in an incredibly low entropy state, it's possible that time flowed differently, or even symmetrically, in both directions. But if temporal reversal is possible, why don't we see it? The truth is, we might not be able to recognize it, even if it's happening. If your entire experience of time were reversed, you wouldn't know the difference. To you, the reversed flow would feel normal, just as forward time does to us. This raises unsettling questions. Is our perception of time just a cosmic accident? Could there be civilizations or beings in some distant corner of the universe living in reverse? Their futures, our pasts. And if we ever encountered them, would communication even be possible? Temporal reversal challenges us to rethink our most basic assumptions about reality. Time feels like a constant, unshakable march, but the universe may be far stranger than we imagine. It invites us to question not just the nature of time, but our place within it. As we explore this idea further, one thing becomes clear. Time is not as straightforward as it seems. Whether it flows forward, backward, or even in ways we can't yet comprehend, it remains one of the deepest mysteries of the universe. And as long as there are mysteries, there will be questions to ask and answers to seek. Maybe that's the true direction of time, not forward or backward, but toward understanding. The utility monster. Consider a creature so extraordinary, so different from you and me, that it could change the way we think about fairness, morality, and happiness. It's not a monster in the traditional sense. It doesn't have fangs or claws. Instead, its power lies in its ability to feel pleasure. More pleasure than any human could ever imagine. Every moment of its life is a symphony of satisfaction, and its hunger for happiness is insatiable. This is the utility monster. a thought experiment introduced by philosopher Robert Nozick. The utility monster exists to challenge one of the most influential moral theories in human history, utilitarianism. Utilitarianism argues that the best action is the one that maximizes happiness for the greatest number of people. A beautiful idea, right? But what happens when one being can experience more happiness than everyone else combined? Let's imagine a world with the utility monster. You and your neighbors are all living your lives, working, struggling, celebrating small joys. But the monster shows up. Every meal it eats brings it more pleasure than an entire city of people could feel in a year. Every gift, every luxury, every resource you give it multiplies its happiness 100-fold. According to utilitarianism, this means the moral thing to do is to feed the monster, to give it more and more and more. At first, maybe this feels okay. After all, making the world a happier place is the goal. But as time goes on, the monster's happiness grows so immense that it outweighs everyone else's suffering. The food on your plate? It would bring the monster more joy. Your house, your time, your relationships, all better given to the monster. In this world, morality demands that the rest of us live in poverty, cold, and hunger to maximize the monster's joy. And here's the unsettling part. Under pure utilitarian logic, this is the right thing to do. The math checks out. But does this feel right? The thought experiment forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. Should the happiness of one being ever outweigh the suffering of many? Is it fair to sacrifice ourselves for someone or something that can never truly be satisfied? And if the greatest good for the greatest number can sometimes lead to such extreme outcomes, is utilitarianism flawed? But let's take a step back. Is the utility monster really so far-fetched? You could argue that we already live in a world shaped by its logic. Think about extreme wealth inequality. A billionaire's 10th luxury yacht adds almost nothing to their life, but the resources it consumes could feed entire communities. Or consider the environment. The happiness of a few today is often prioritized over the well-being of future generations. The utility monster also raises questions about how we value happiness. In utilitarianism, all happiness is treated as equal in quality. But are some pleasures worth more than others? Is a community's shared joy more meaningful than one being's endless indulgence? Or, more provocatively, does the depth of happiness matter less than its distribution? Nozick's thought experiment isn't meant to tear down utilitarianism entirely. After all, the idea of maximizing happiness has led to progress in human rights, healthcare, and education. But it's a reminder that morality isn't always simple math. A world that prioritizes one extreme, no matter how logical, can lose sight of the human experience. So, what do we do with the utility monster? Do we feed it, accept it, reject it, or redefine the rules entirely? The thought experiment leaves these questions unanswered, but it challenges us to think more deeply about fairness, balance, and what it truly means to build a good and just world. Maybe the real lesson of the utility monster isn't about monsters at all. Maybe it's about us, how we navigate a world where happiness, resources, and morality are never equally distributed, and how we decide what we value most. Anthropic shadow. The universe is vast, filled with countless mysteries and mind-bending phenomena. But among these, there is an unsettling concept hiding in plain sight, a thought experiment that turns our assumptions about survival, existence, and probability upside down. It's called the anthropic shadow, and it might explain why we're still here to think about it. Let's start with the obvious question. Why haven't we gone extinct yet? Humanity has faced countless dangers throughout history: supervolcanoes, asteroid impacts, pandemics, nuclear wars, and more. Many species before us have disappeared forever. So, why not us? Is it pure luck? Or is there something deeper going on? The anthropic shadow offers a strange answer. It suggests that we're still here not because the universe is particularly kind to us, but because we couldn't observe our own extinction. Simply put, if a catastrophe large enough to wipe out humanity occurred, there would be no one left to think about it. The fact that we're alive to ask the question biases our perspective. We exist in the shadow of survivable risks, unaware of the catastrophes that could have completely erased us. To understand this better, imagine a casino of cosmic disasters. Some events are minor inconveniences, like rolling a dice and getting a 1, things that harm humanity but allow us to rebuild. Others are catastrophic, like rolling a 6, which ends the game entirely. The anthropic shadow suggests that by definition, we can only exist in games where the dice hasn't landed on a 6. This skews our perception of how risky the universe truly is. Here's the twist. Because we're biased to observe a world where humanity has survived, we might underestimate how common extinction-level events really are. If humanity had already faced dozens of near-extinction catastrophes in the past, it might explain why our recorded history shows fewer of them than expected. The events we do see, the near misses, are only the survivable ones. The rest are erased from memory because they erased us. But this raises a troubling question. If we're still here, does that mean the worst is behind us? Or are we just lucky so far, living in the calm before the storm? The anthropic shadow doesn't just mess with our understanding of the past. It casts a dark uncertainty over our future. If extinction-level events are more common than they seem, what does that say about our odds of long-term survival? Some argue that the shadow effect could make us dangerously complacent. Imagine looking at history and thinking, things haven't been too bad so far. But what if history is only showing us the disasters that weren't quite bad enough to wipe us out? If we ignore the shadow, we risk underestimating threats that could end our story for good. There's another layer to this mystery. The anthropic shadow connects to a broader philosophical concept, the anthropic principle. This principle says that the universe must be observed in a way that allows observers to exist. In other words, the very fact that we're here to question the odds of survival might tell us something about why the universe is the way it is. But does this mean we're special, or just incredibly lucky? If nothing else, the anthropic shadow forces us to think carefully about the fragility of existence. We can't let our survival so far blind us to the risks ahead. Every volcano that didn't erupt, every asteroid that missed Earth, every global catastrophe we narrowly avoided, they aren't guarantees of safety. They're reminders of how much is at stake. So what can we do? First, we can learn. By studying risks, from climate change to artificial intelligence to cosmic threats, we can better understand the dangers lurking in the shadow. Second, we can act. If the universe has given us a rare chance to survive, we owe it to future generations to use that chance wisely. The anthropic shadow is a humbling idea. It reminds us that survival isn't inevitable, and that existence itself is an extraordinary privilege. But it also carries a spark of hope. If we're aware of the shadow, we can shine a light into it. By facing the risks ahead with knowledge, caution, and determination, we can turn our fragile moment in the universe into something more lasting. A future where humanity steps out of the shadow and into the light. The experience machine. Imagine a machine that can give you everything you've ever wanted, not just material things, but experiences, memories, and feelings. The perfect life simulated to perfection. Plug yourself in, and you could live as a celebrated artist, a fearless adventurer, or a beloved hero. Every moment would feel real, every emotion genuine. The question is simple. Would you get in? This is the experience machine, a thought experiment introduced by philosopher Robert Nozick in 1974. It's designed to challenge our ideas about happiness, reality, and what it means to live a meaningful life. At first glance, the machine seems irresistible. Who wouldn't want to escape the pain and uncertainty of life for a perfect existence? But let's pause for a moment. If the machine can simulate anything, what's the catch? Why does this thought experiment make so many people uncomfortable? To answer this, let's unpack the machine. Imagine entering a sleek pod where electrodes attach to your brain. Once inside, your memories of the real world fade away, and the machine feeds your brain signals that make every experience feel completely authentic. You can't tell the difference, but the life you're living is a fabrication, an illusion crafted by the machine. The paradox of the experience machine is that while it promises ultimate pleasure, it forces us to confront deeper questions about what we truly value. Nozick argued that most people wouldn't choose to plug in. Why? Because deep down, we care about more than just feeling happy. We want our happiness to mean something. We don't just want to experience love, success, or connection. We want those things to be real. Consider love. In the machine, you could feel loved by everyone around you, but none of it would be genuine. Your relationships, friendships, and family would all be simulations. Would you be okay with that? Or imagine creating a masterpiece in the machine, only to realize later it was never shared with anyone. It was only for you. Does achievement matter if it has no impact on the real world? This thought experiment suggests that humans don't just seek pleasure. We seek authenticity. We want to be good people, not just feel like good people. We want to overcome real challenges, connect with real people, and leave a real mark on the world. But let's complicate things. If you're skeptical of the machine, ask yourself this. How do you know you're not already in one? The life you're living could be a sophisticated simulation, indistinguishable from reality. And if it is, does it matter? Does the meaning of your experiences change if they turn out to be fabricated? The experience machine also raises ethical questions about technology. As virtual reality and AI become increasingly advanced, how far will we go to blur the line between reality and simulation? If we create machines capable of delivering perfect happiness, will we choose to use them? Should we? Ultimately, the experience machine challenges us to confront the nature of our desires. It forces us to ask what we value more, pleasure or reality, comfort or truth. And while the thought experiment doesn't give us easy answers, it reminds us that life's messiness, imperfection, and unpredictability are what make it real. So, would you plug into the machine? Would you trade the complex, sometimes painful reality of your life for an illusion of perfect happiness? Or does the very idea of stepping inside make you realize that the beauty of life lies in its authenticity, in its rawness, in its reality? The choice is yours, or maybe it's already been made.